Let me tell you something that took me years to truly understand. Not just intellectually, not just as an idea I could recite, but in my bones, in the marrow of who I was becoming. The conversation I want to have with you today is not about technique. It is not about a 10-step program you tape to your refrigerator and forget about by Thursday. What I want to talk about is something far more fundamental, far more life-altering than any technique could ever be. I want to talk about the picture you carry of yourself, because everything, and I mean everything, rises and falls on that picture. You see, most people walk through this world with a photograph in their mind. And the tragedy is not that they have a photograph. We all have one. The tragedy is that most of them did not choose that photograph. Someone else took it. A parent who was too tired or too broken or too preoccupied to encourage them. A teacher who said, without thinking, perhaps even while moving on to the next student, "You're not really the academic type, are you?" A group of children on a playground who laughed at the wrong moment. A first experience of real failure that was interpreted not as data but as verdict. And from that photograph, from that singular snapshot taken in a moment of pain or ignorance or casual cruelty or simple bad timing, an entire life gets built. A life lived beneath its own potential. A life that whispers in the quiet moments, in the honest moments, "I'm not quite enough." Not loudly, not with dramatic proclamations. Just quietly, persistently, like water dripping on stone. And eventually, given enough time and enough repetition, the stone gives way. Now here's what I want you to grasp before we go any further, because this is the foundation on which everything else we discuss today will be built. Your self-image is not your destiny. It is merely your current operating system. And operating systems can be updated, they can be upgraded, they can be completely overhauled if you have the right information and the right resolve and the right habits of mind. The question is not whether transformation is possible. It absolutely is. I have seen it happen in people who had every reason, by the conventional logic of their circumstances, to remain exactly where they were. The question is not capability. The question is willingness. Whether you are willing to do the interior work, the demanding, sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes exhilarating, sometimes deeply liberating work of examining who you have decided you are and then making a new decision, a better decision. A decision aligned not with your past, but with your possibility. Let us start at the very foundation. What exactly is self-image? Because this word gets used casually in ways that strip it of its full power. Self-image is the mental and emotional portrait of yourself that you carry into every room you enter, every conversation you have, every relationship you form, every opportunity that comes knocking at your door. It is the invisible autobiography you have been writing about yourself since you were old enough to have an experience and draw a conclusion from it. And every experience since then, every success, every failure, every compliment, every criticism, every moment of triumph, every season of struggle, has been filtered through that autobiography, interpreted through its lens, added to its narrative, used as further evidence of what it already believes to be true. Think about that for a moment. Every experience, not some experiences, not the dramatic ones, every single one. If your self-image says, "I am unlucky," then when something goes wrong, you nod quietly to yourself and say, "See? Of course, this is how things go for me." And when something goes right, and things do go right, even for people with limiting self-images, you say, "Well, that was a fluke, that won't last." The self-image is always looking for confirmation of what it already believes. That is not a flaw in human nature. That is actually a feature, a sophisticated feature of how the human mind works. It is designed to protect the existing model of reality, to maintain coherence, to keep the inner world consistent. The problem is not the mechanism. The problem is when the belief that the mechanism is protecting is wrong. When the story it is maintaining and defending is a story that no longer serves you, that perhaps never served you, that was imposed from the outside and mistaken for an inside truth. And here is where I want you to lean in very closely, because I was that person. I grew up in a small town in Idaho. My family did not have much in the material sense, and I carried with me for years a quiet shame about that. Not a dramatic, operatic shame, but a subtle and very real sense that people like me, people from backgrounds and beginnings like mine, did not get to play in the bigger game, did not get to sit at the finer tables, did not get to dream the larger dreams, entertain the more expansive ambitions, claim the greater rewards. Nobody told me that outright. It was not a speech anyone delivered, but the message was transmitted anyway, in 1,000 small ways, in what was not said as much as in what was, in the absence of models who looked like me doing the things I was beginning to sense I might want to do. And I built my life around that image, efficiently, unconsciously, thoroughly, until a man named Earl Schuff sat across from me and said something that turned my world inside out. He said, "Jim, the problem isn't your circumstances. The problem is your philosophy." And by philosophy, he meant the picture. He meant the story. He meant the self-image that had been running my life like an invisible hand on the steering wheel. So let's talk about where self-image comes from, because you cannot repair or rebuild something you do not fully understand. The first and most powerful source is your early environment. The family you grew up in, the neighborhood that surrounded you, the economic circumstances of your childhood, the emotional climate of your home. Now, I want to be careful here because I am not interested in blame and I am not interested in excuses. I am interested in understanding. Understanding is the beginning of transformation. Those early circumstances did not determine your fate. They absolutely did not. And I have met too many people who rose from devastating origins to believe otherwise. But they did plant seeds. Some of those seeds are flowers. Some of them are weeds. The real work of genuine adulthood, not just biological adulthood, which comes automatically, but psychological adulthood, which requires deliberate effort, is learning to distinguish between the two. Because some of what you absorbed in childhood is profoundly valuable. The resilience of someone who had to figure things out without much help. The creativity of someone who had to make something from very little. The empathy of someone who understands what it is to struggle. These are real gifts forged in difficult circumstances, and some of what you absorbed is simply damage, pain, and limitation that was passed down from one generation to the next, like a dark inheritance that no one consciously chose to bequeath. The courageous act, the truly adult act, is to look honestly at everything you received and decide consciously what you will keep and what you will leave behind. To be the one in your lineage who says, "This stops here, this pattern, this limitation, this way of seeing ourselves, it ends with me." The second source of self-image is the words of significant people in your life. Words are remarkably, almost frighteningly powerful. They land in the soul of a child like seeds on fertile, vulnerable ground. A parent who says regularly and sincerely, "You are so capable. You figure things out. I believe in you completely." That child carries into adulthood a very different internal portrait than the child who heard, "You're so clumsy. You never get it right. Why can't you be more like your sister?" And here is something you need to understand about the asymmetry of language and the human nervous system. We remember the cutting words far longer and far more vividly than the kind ones. That is not vanity or weakness or oversensitivity. That is simply the way we are designed. The nervous system is a threat detection system at its core. And criticism, even from someone who loves you, even from someone who meant well, even from someone who said it in passing and forgot it 5 minutes later, registers as a threat. It goes deep. It goes into the foundation. And from that foundation, the entire structure of a life gets built. The third source is your personal history of successes and failures, and more precisely, the interpretations you have attached to them, because the events themselves are neutral. It is the interpretation that carries the charge. Every time you attempted something and it worked, a deposit went into your account of self-belief. A small notation in the ledger that says, "I did that. I can do things." And every time you attempted something and it fell apart, one of two things happened depending on your interpretive framework. Either another deposit was made. That was an education. I know things now I did not know before, and that knowledge has value. Or a withdrawal was taken. I knew I was not cut out for this. I should have stayed in my lane. Same event. Dramatically different conclusions. And those conclusions write themselves into the self-image like ink into paper, and the paper dries and the ink sets, and what was once a provisional interpretation becomes a fixed belief. Two people can have the identical experience of a business falling apart, of a marriage ending, of a career not working out the way they planned. One of them says, "That was an education. I understand failure from the inside now. I know what to avoid. I know what I underestimated. I am more equipped, more realistic, and more resilient for the next attempt." The other says, "I knew I was not cut out for this. This is what happens to people like me when they reach too far." Same set of facts, completely opposite conclusions. And those conclusions become the self-image that shapes every subsequent decision, every subsequent risk, every subsequent step toward or away from the life they are capable of living. Now here's the critical insight I want you to hold on to with both hands as we continue. Your self-image operates below the level of conscious thought most of the time. It is running in the background quietly and efficiently like the operating system of a computer. You do not see the code, you just see the results on the screen. You see why you hesitated when that opportunity knocked and you told yourself you needed more time to think about it, when what was actually happening was that your self-image was telling you that opportunity was not meant for someone like you. You see why you talked yourself out of the application, the phone call, the conversation that might have changed everything. You see why when someone gave you a genuine and sincere compliment, you deflected it or minimized it or immediately explained it away, because deep in the self-image, a compliment felt like something that did not quite fit, like a coat that belonged to someone else. That was your self-image doing its job. And its job, as it currently understands it, as it has been programmed by the accumulation of all those early experiences and absorbed messages, is to keep you consistent with the picture, to maintain the established identity, because the mind craves consistency above almost everything else. It would rather be consistently wrong than occasionally right in a way that disrupts the established narrative of who it has decided you are. So the first step, the very first and most indispensable step in building a new and better self-image is awareness. Not dramatic, sudden awareness like a bolt of lightning, but quiet, patient, consistent awareness. You must become a careful and compassionate observer of your own interior conversation. Most people have never done this. They have never sat quietly and truly listened to the running commentary in their own mind. They have never noticed the editorial voice that comments on everything, every action, every plan, every ambition, every interaction. They have been broadcasting on that channel for decades without ever pausing to actually listen to what is being said. And when they finally do listen, when they finally tune into that frequency, many of them are genuinely shocked by what they hear, because that voice, that inner narrator, is not kind, it is not encouraging, it is not even particularly accurate. It is the accumulated residue of old wounds and old judgments and old limitations that were imposed from the outside but have long since been adopted and internalized as inside truth, as self-evident fact, as simply the way things are. Start listening, and when you listen, do not judge yourself for what you hear. This is critical. The moment you begin to feel shame or guilt or contempt for the quality of your interior dialogue, you have added another layer of negative self-image on top of the one you were already trying to dismantle. Simply observe. Say, with genuine curiosity rather than judgment, "That is interesting. That is what I have been telling myself. That is the story that has been running this show." Because awareness is the beginning of choice, and choice is the beginning of everything real that ever happens in a human life. Once you have developed the habit of awareness, the next discipline, and I use that word deliberately because this is not a one-time event but a consistent practice, is to begin challenging the narrative, not with hollow, cheerful repetitions of phrases you do not yet believe, not with empty affirmations you recite in the mirror while internally cringing at the gap between what you are saying and what you actually feel, but with evidence. With a genuine, rigorous, honest examination of what you are actually capable of, what you have actually accomplished, what you have actually survived, and what you have actually navigated. Because here is what I know about the vast majority of people. They have far more evidence of their capability, their resilience, their resourcefulness, and their strength than they have ever stopped to acknowledge and give themselves credit for. They have moved through things that would have stopped lesser characters in their tracks. They have figured things out under conditions of pressure and scarcity and uncertainty. They have shown up repeatedly when showing up was hard. They have demonstrated consistently a level of competence and courage and determination that their self-image has steadfastly refused to incorporate into its portrait of them. I want you to do something that I consider one of the most powerful exercises in personal development, and it costs nothing and requires nothing more than a piece of paper and your honest memory. Sit down and make a list, not of your dreams, not of your aspirations, not of where you want to go. Make a list of where you have been, what you have navigated, what you have overcome. Go all the way back through your life, through all its chapters, and write down every significant challenge you faced and got through. Every time you did not think you could make it and you made it. Every time you tried something that frightened you and you tried it anyway. Every time you failed and got back up. Every time you lost something important and kept moving. Every time you were told you could not and you did. Write it all down. Because when you hold the actual documented record of a life fully and courageously lived, when you see on paper the accumulated evidence of your own survival and capability and growth, it becomes very difficult, nearly impossible, if you are being honest with yourself, to maintain the fiction that you are insufficient. The evidence simply does not support that conclusion. Now let's turn to one of the most underappreciated forces in shaping the self-image, and that is the quality of your associations. I have said many times, and I will keep saying it because it is one of the most important truths I know. You are, to a remarkable and sometimes uncomfortable degree, the average of the people you spend the most consistent time with. Not just in terms of income or habits, though the evidence on that is compelling, but in terms of how you perceive yourself, in terms of the standard you hold yourself to, in terms of what you consider possible and what you consider out of reach. Because the people around you are always, constantly, in every interaction, reflecting back to you an image of who you are and what you are worth. And over time, that reflection becomes your mirror. It becomes the basis on which your self-image updates itself. If you are surrounded by people who treat you as deeply capable, who challenge your thinking, who expect excellent things from you and are genuinely unsatisfied when you settle for less than your best, who speak of your potential as though it is real and present and available right now, your self-image will begin to rise toward that expectation. It cannot help but rise. The consistent input of being regarded as capable creates new neural pathways, new internal conversations, new evidence for the self-image to absorb and incorporate. But if you are surrounded by people who are comfortable with stagnation, who mock ambition, who describe big dreams as arrogance, who say, be realistic, every time you dare to envision a life a little larger than the one you currently occupy, your self-image will drift toward that level of expectation. Like water finding its own level, you will settle into the shape of the container your associations create. This is not a call to abandon the people you love or to become coldly transactional in your relationships. It is a call to be deliberate, to intentionally expand your world to include voices and presences that elevate you, to seek out with real effort and real commitment the company of people who have already built what you want to build, who already think the way you want to think, who carry themselves with the confidence and competence you are in the process of developing. Because proximity to excellence changes you. Greatness is genuinely contagious. A high standard of self-regard is contagious. Ambition paired with discipline is contagious. And so, I am afraid, is its opposite. You will catch something from the people you consistently spend time with. The only question is what you would prefer to catch. Let me take a moment to address something that quietly devastates more self-images than almost anything else I know of, and that is the corrosive habit of misused comparison. Now, comparison itself is not inherently destructive. Used wisely, in the right spirit, looking at someone who has accomplished more than you and asking genuinely, how did they do that? What can I learn from their path? What does their achievement tell me about what is possible for a human being? That kind of comparison expands you. It broadens your frame of the possible. It shows you a living, breathing example that the thing you want to do can in fact be done. But that is not how most people use comparison. Most people look at someone further along the journey and conclude, not I can get there, but I don't have what they have. I don't have their natural gift, their lucky connections, their fortunate circumstances, their particular combination of timing and talent. And that conclusion, almost always arrived at prematurely, before the full evidence is in, before the real effort has been sustained, is a form of preemptive surrender dressed in the language of realism. Compare yourself to who you were 12 months ago. That is the comparison that carries real meaning and real power, because you are on your own particular timeline, developing your own particular set of capacities, walking your own irreplaceable path through this world. And the moment you try to overlay someone else's timeline onto your story, you create a kind of suffering that is entirely unnecessary. You create the sense that you are behind, as though there is a schedule, a universal timetable, and you are failing to keep pace with it. And none of that is true. The window is open right now. It is open this morning. It is open in this conversation. What you do with the time that remains to you, and what picture you hold of yourself while you do it, is entirely up to you. Now, I want to spend significant time on the discipline of personal development, because you cannot grow a self-image without growing the self. These two things are inseparable, bound together at the deepest level, and the sequence is important to understand. You invest in yourself, you read, you study, you learn, you practice, and through that investment, you acquire capabilities you did not previously possess. You develop skills, you expand your understanding, you become genuinely more competent in areas that matter to you, and that new competence produces new accomplishments. Small ones at first, then larger ones, and each accomplishment deposits new evidence into the ledger of your self-belief. New entries that say unmistakably, I figured that out, I can figure things out, I am not fixed, I am not finished, I am in the process of becoming, and the process is working. As that evidence accumulates, as the ledger fills with documented proof of your own growth, the self-image begins to expand. Not through willpower or positive thinking or the sheer force of wishing it were different, but organically, naturally, because the self-image now has a factual, verifiable basis for a higher assessment of its own worth. This is why I have said consistently for decades, the greatest investment you will ever make is in your own education. Not necessarily formal, credentialed education, though that has its place and its value, but the education of the self, the patient, consistent, deliberate expansion of what you know and what you can do and how you think. Reading the books that stretch your current understanding beyond its comfortable boundaries. Attending the events where ideas bigger than your current ones are in the air. Sitting across from people who have traveled further down certain roads and asking them, with genuine humility and genuine hunger, to share what they have learned. Every hour you invest in your own development, every hour without exception, is an hour spent building the foundation of a more expansive and more accurate self-image, because you genuinely know more than you did. You genuinely can do more than you could, and therefore you genuinely are more than you were, not in a boastful sense, in a factual sense, in a sense that no one can dispute, least of all you, because you did the work yourself and you felt it happen. Let me now address the matter of goals and how they intersect with self-image, because I think this relationship is far more intimate than most people realize or discuss. A goal is not merely a target written on a planning document. A goal, a real committed goal backed by genuine decision and consistent action, is a declaration of identity. When you set a genuine goal and pursue it with sustained effort, you are saying to yourself and to the world, I am the kind of person who does this. I am the kind of person who has ambitions of this magnitude and takes them seriously enough to work toward them every day, whether or not I feel like it, whether or not the results are immediately visible, whether or not anyone is watching. And that declaration, lived out daily through specific tangible actions, begins to rewrite the self-image from the inside out. It changes the operating system not through direct reprogramming, but through the accumulated evidence of a life being lived at a higher standard. But here is the nuance I want you to understand and remember. The goal must be calibrated carefully. It must stretch you genuinely, must extend your current reach, must require you to become something more than you presently are, without being so disconnected from your current self-image that it produces not inspiration, but immediate hopeless paralysis. A goal that makes you feel, the moment you set it, that you are lying to yourself. That is a goal that needs to be broken into smaller, more immediately achievable steps. Steps you can take today, this week, this month. Steps that feel challenging but not absurd, because each step taken, each small goal accomplished, adds another piece of evidence to the ledger, another notch on the pole of documented capability. And the self-image rises with each notch, one rung at a time, one achievement at a time. Until one day you look back and realize you have climbed to heights that would have seemed, from where you began, as inaccessible as the summit of a mountain seen from the valley floor. I want to turn now to something that I consider one of the most quietly powerful forces in either building or eroding the self-image, and that is the integrity of the promises you make to yourself. Not the promises you make publicly. Those carry social accountability, external pressure, the management of other people's expectations. I am talking about the private promises, the ones only you know about. The decision you made at 11 o'clock last night that you were going to get up at 6 and exercise. The commitment you made to yourself on Sunday that this week you would read for 30 minutes every morning before opening your email. The promise you recorded in your journal that you were going to make those phone calls, have that conversation, begin that project. The private commitments kept only between you and yourself. When you keep those commitments, when you honor your own word to yourself, even when no one is watching and no one will know the difference either way, something important happens in the self-image. A very specific and very powerful kind of respect begins to accumulate. Self-trust, the deep earned experiential knowing that you are a person of your word, that when you decide something, it happens, that when you commit to something, you can be counted upon. And a self-image built on a foundation of self-trust is extraordinarily resilient. It does not depend on the opinions of others or the validation of results to maintain its fundamental assessment of your worth. It knows what you are made of because it has watched you demonstrate it quietly, day after day, in the small private moments when no applause was available and no audience was present. Conversely, and I want you to hear this clearly, every private promise broken, every small commitment abandoned, every moment when you choose comfort over your stated intention makes a withdrawal from the account of self-trust. A small one, perhaps, seemingly insignificant in isolation, but these withdrawals accumulate in exactly the same way the deposits do. And over time, a pattern of broken self-promises writes a very specific and very damaging entry into the self-image. I am the kind of person who does not follow through. When I make commitments, even to myself, especially to myself, I cannot be trusted to keep them. And once that belief is firmly installed, it poisons everything. It undermines every goal the moment you set it, because some part of you is already calculating the odds that you will actually do what you say you are going to do, and the calculation comes up short. So begin now. Begin today to treat your promises to yourself with the same seriousness you would bring to a promise made to someone you deeply respect. Not because you are trying to impress yourself, but because every kept promise is a deposit in the bank of self-belief, and those deposits, consistently made over a long enough period, compound into something that cannot be shaken. Let me now speak about the particular relationship between courage and self-image, because this is one of the most direct levers available to anyone who wants to change how they see themselves. Courage is not the absence of fear. I want want to be absolutely clear on this point. Courage is acting rightly, moving forward, doing what needs to be done in the full and honest presence of fear. The fear does not have to leave before you can be courageous. In fact, if there is no fear, what you are doing is not courage. It is simply comfort. Courage requires the presence of fear and the choice to proceed despite it. And here is what acting courageously does to the self-image, specifically and measurably. Every time you feel genuine fear and you move forward anyway, every time you have the uncomfortable conversation you have been avoiding, apply for the opportunity you were not sure you were qualified for, speak up in the room where you were tempted to stay silent, take the risk that had no guaranteed outcome, you add to the portrait. You add a specific entry that reads, "I am someone who does not let fear determine the boundaries of my life. I am someone who can be counted upon to show up even when showing up requires something real of me." And that entry changes the picture. It changes the self-image in a way that thinking about courage, reading about courage, admiring courage in others simply cannot. Conversely, every retreat, every time you let the fear win the argument, every time you stay where it is comfortable and familiar when something in you knew it was time to move, adds a different kind of evidence. Evidence that your limits are approximately where you currently believe them to be. Evidence that fear is the final authority in your life, and the self-image contracts accordingly. It gets smaller, more cautious, more defended, higher walls, tighter perimeter, less territory available for actual living. This contraction rarely announces itself dramatically. It happens quietly, gradually, one avoided risk at a time, until you look up one day and realize you are living in a very small room of your own construction, wondering how you got there. The antidote is simple to describe and requires real discipline to execute. Do something that genuinely stretches you on a regular basis, not recklessly, not stupidly, but deliberately, purposefully, with the understanding that courage, like every other quality worth developing, is built through practice. You do not become courageous by deciding to be courageous. You become courageous by taking courageous actions one after another, accumulating the evidence that you are the kind of person who does not allow fear to set the ceiling on their life. That evidence, consistently gathered, consistently recorded in the ledger of your experience, rewires the self-image over time. It builds a portrait of someone genuinely formidable, someone who has earned through action and not through thought alone the right to see themselves as capable and worthy of the larger life. Now let me speak to something that must be addressed in any honest conversation about self-image, and that is the matter of how you speak to yourself in the daily interior conversation of your life. The relationship you have with yourself, the ongoing, continuous, never silent dialogue between you and your own mind, is the most important relationship you will ever have, more foundational than any marriage, any friendship, any professional partnership, because it is the one relationship that was present before all others and will remain when all others have concluded. Most people speak to themselves in ways they would never speak to a person they cared about, ways they would never speak to a child, a friend, a colleague whose well-being they valued. They say things internally in the privacy of their own mind that would be recognized immediately as cruel and destructive if they were said out loud to another human being. "You idiot, you always mess this up. Who do you think you are to want something like that? You're not smart enough, disciplined enough, worthy enough." These are not occasional thoughts for many people. They are the ambient soundtrack of their interior life, the constant background radiation of self-criticism that accompanies them through every activity, every interaction, every ambition. The mind does not distinguish between a thought and an instruction. When you say to yourself repeatedly, "I always get this wrong," the mind does not evaluate that statement critically and consider whether it is actually true. It receives it as information about who you are and then organizes your behavior accordingly. It literally tries to make it true, not out of malice, but out of the deep drive toward internal consistency. You get what you rehearse internally. The internal conversation is the rehearsal for the life that follows. So begin to speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you love and believe in. Not dishonestly. I am not asking you to tell yourself things you genuinely do not believe because the mind knows the difference, but accurately. And accuracy in most cases is far more generous than the default self-assessment most people carry, because most people are genuinely harder on themselves than the evidence warrants. They weight the failures more heavily than the successes. They hold themselves to a standard of perfection they would never dream of applying to the people they care about, and then feel like failures for not meeting it. Speak to yourself with accurate generosity. Acknowledge what you have done well. Give yourself genuine credit for the growth you have achieved. Recognize the difficulty of the road you have walked, and give yourself the respect that anyone who has walked a difficult road sincerely deserves. Let me also speak to the matter of how you handle criticism, because the way a person responds to being criticized is one of the most revealing windows into the quality of their self-image. People with fragile self-images have a very specific relationship with criticism. They cannot receive it genuinely or productively, because when the self-image is already operating close to the edge of its own viability, already engaged in the constant and exhausting project of maintaining a barely adequate sense of worth, criticism feels like an assault. It feels, in the nervous system, not like information, but like attack. And the response to attack is either to flee or to fight, either to collapse into it and take it as confirmation of the negative self-image already present, or to reject it violently and dismiss both the criticism and the critic with defensive anger. Neither of those responses serves you, because a person who has built a solid and accurate picture of themselves, who knows their worth and their capability, and has done the work to earn that knowledge, can receive criticism as what it actually is: information, data, sometimes inaccurate data, sometimes imperfectly delivered data, sometimes data with an agenda behind it, but data nonetheless, something to be examined, assessed, and either incorporated into the ongoing project of self-improvement or set aside with clarity and without drama. A secure self-image can say, "That's a fair point. I hadn't considered that angle. I'm going to think about how to address it." And it can equally say, "I've considered that criticism and I don't think it's accurate. I understand the perspective, but it doesn't match what I know to be true of myself, and I'm going to proceed as planned." Both responses are available to the person with a secure self-image. The first because genuine self-respect is not threatened by the discovery of an area for growth. It welcomes it. And the second because genuine self-knowledge is not intimidated by opinions that contradict it. The secure self-image does not need everyone to agree with its assessment of itself. It has been built on something more durable than external opinion. Know who you are, work continuously to become more of it, and trust the process. Now I want to speak directly to those of you who carry the weight of significant mistakes, who have failed publicly or privately or both, who have let people down, including yourselves, who carry a self-image that has been damaged not only by the judgments of others but by your own honest assessment of times when you fell short of who you wanted to be, because I think this is important and it is often left out of the conversation about self-image. You are not the sum of your worst moments. Let me say that again because it needs to land. You are not the sum of your worst moments. You are the sum of your responses to those moments, the learning you extracted from them, the growth that became possible because of them, the resilience you built in navigating their aftermath, the failures, the mistakes, the seasons of falling short. Those are chapters in the story of your life. Important chapters, instructive chapters, chapters that shape the person present here today. But they are not the title of the book. They are not the definition. They are not the verdict on your worth as a human being. Every person of genuine accomplishment that I have ever studied or known personally has a substantial collection of failures in their history, not despite their success, but in many ways because of it, because the failures were part of the education, part of the seasoning, part of the process by which a person is built into someone capable of sustaining genuine achievement over a lifetime. The person who has never failed at anything significant has never tried anything significant. They have played well within their current boundaries, have stayed in territory where success was guaranteed, and in doing so have avoided not only failure but also the particular kind of growth that only comes from risking and losing and getting back up and trying again with greater knowledge and greater resilience and a more honest understanding of what the task actually requires. So forgive yourself, not as a dismissal of responsibility, not as a way of pretending that consequences did not happen or that people were not affected by your failures or your mistakes, but as a deliberate act of forward motion, as a decision. And it is a decision made consciously, repeatedly if necessary, that you are more interested in who you are becoming than in endlessly relitigating who you have been. The past is a school, not a prison. You were enrolled there. You learned what it had to teach, and now it is time to graduate. Let me speak to the role of service in building a healthy self-image because I believe this dimension is consistently undervalued. When you step outside the preoccupation with self, outside the internal audit of your own worth, the monitoring of your own progress, the management of your own feelings about yourself, and you turn your genuine attention and your genuine energy toward the well-being, the problems, the growth of someone else, something remarkable happens in your interior landscape. You experience yourself as someone who has something to give, as someone whose presence in another person's life makes a real and positive difference, as someone whose knowledge, whose time, whose caring attention is genuinely valuable to another human being. And that experience, not the idea of it, not the thought of it, but the actual lived experience of being useful to someone, writes something very specific and very enduring into the self-image. It writes, "I have worth, not theoretical worth. Not the worth that comes from what people say about me or what my bank account reflects or what title appears on my business card. Real worth, the worth of actual impact, the worth of genuine contribution. The self-image that is rooted in a consistent practice of service and contribution is among the most durable, because it is not dependent on external validation or fluctuating results or the opinions of people who may not have your best interests at heart. It is anchored in something real, the verifiable, felt experience of having made someone else's life better through your presence and your effort. And that anchor holds through storms that would capsize a self-image built on less substantial ground. So as you work on the interior landscape of your self-image, simultaneously look outward. Ask yourself daily as a matter of genuine practice, who can I help today? What problem can I solve? What value can I add to the people in my life and in my world? Not because the universe operates as a ledger and your acts of service will be repaid in kind, though in my experience they often are, in ways both expected and wonderfully unexpected, but because in the act of genuine service, you meet yourself at your best. And the self you meet at your best is the self-image worth having. There is also the matter of the environment you deliberately create around yourself, both the physical environment and the informational one, because the environment is never neutral. It is always communicating something to you, always sending signals, and those signals are continuously absorbed by the self-image, which reads them as evidence of who you are and what kind of life you inhabit and what you believe you are worth. Consider the physical spaces of your daily existence, your home, your workspace, the condition and order of the places where you spend your hours, the intentionality with which you maintain your environment, the degree to which you have created spaces that reflect a real and genuine standard, spaces that communicate to your own senses that this is the habitat of someone who regards their own life as worth taking seriously, that matters in ways both obvious and subtle. A life of deliberate order, not obsessive, not perfectionist, but genuinely intentional, is a life that says to its inhabitant through the simple visual and sensory experience of living in it, I am someone who creates conditions for my own flourishing. I am someone who respects their own time and space enough to maintain them with care. That message received daily writes itself quietly but persistently into the self-image. And when you need to build a new self-image, when you are at the beginning of that process, sometimes the most practical first act is environmental. Organize the space. Remove from your surroundings the things that remind you of an older version of yourself. Make room, literally, physically, deliberately, for the person you are becoming. These acts are not trivial. They are signals to the whole of your interior world that something real is changing here, that a new standard is in effect. And give the same consideration to the informational environment, to what you consistently allow into your mind, what you read in the morning, what you listen to during your commute, what conversations you participate in regularly, and what voices you allow to have consistent access to your attention. Because the mind absorbs what it is repeatedly exposed to and begins to regard it as normal, as inevitable, as simply the way things are. If you spend a significant portion of your daily hours in the company of cynicism and complaint and the endless broadcast of everything that is breaking down in the world, the self-image will absorb that atmosphere. It will begin to see scarcity and threat as the fundamental nature of reality. And a self-image that perceives the world primarily through the lens of threat does not reach for opportunity. It contracts, it protects, it waits. But if you invest even 30 minutes of every day in the company of the best thinking human beings have produced on the subjects of growth and character and achievement and possibility, something begins to shift in the interior. The default view of what is available to a human life begins to expand. The internal conversations begin to change in quality. The models of what a person can accomplish, against what odds, from what beginnings, begin to be more accurate and more genuinely instructive. You are shaped profoundly by what you consistently consume intellectually and emotionally. Choose those inputs with the same care you would bring to any decision that has the power to determine who you become. There is also something I want to be on record about, and that is the connection between how you treat your physical self and how you regard your complete self. The body is not separate from the self-image. It is part of it. The way you inhabit your body, the posture you carry through the world, the physical condition you maintain, the energy level you cultivate or neglect, all of this communicates something to your own nervous system about how you regard yourself as a whole. When you invest in your physical health, not obsessively, not with the distorted lens of vanity, but with the genuine care of someone who understands that the body is the instrument of the life and the instrument deserves maintenance, you send a message to yourself. That message is, I am worth taking care of. My vitality matters. My presence in this world is something I intend to sustain and protect. And that message, received consistently over time, becomes part of the self-image. It adds to the portrait of someone who takes themselves seriously. Treat the physical dimension of your life with the same intentionality you bring to the intellectual and the emotional and the professional. Not because appearance is the measure of your worth. It absolutely is not. But because caring for yourself physically is one of the clearest and most daily expressions of the belief that you are worth caring for. I want to speak also about the profound relationship between self-image and genuine human connection. People with wounded self-images become extraordinarily skilled at connection without vulnerability, at warmth without exposure, at being enormously generous with others while keeping their own interior world carefully guarded. And there is a real intelligence in that strategy. It has protected them from real pain in the past, but the cost of it in the present is the inability to experience the full depth of human intimacy that is available to someone who has done the work to believe they are worth knowing, worth loving, worth the vulnerability that real closeness requires. When you build a genuinely healthy self-image, when you arrive at an honest and generous and accurate picture of who you are, including your strengths and your growing edges and your history and your aspirations, you become capable of a different kind of relationship, one where you can be seen and still feel safe, where you can share what is true about yourself without the constant anxiety that it will result in abandonment or rejection, where closeness does not feel like a risk to your fundamental sense of worth, but simply like a gift, something you give and receive freely because you trust both yourself and the other person to handle the truth of your humanity with care. This is one of the greatest rewards of doing the interior work of self-image. Not just the professional achievement, not just the expanded capability, not just the greater resilience in the face of difficulty, but the capacity for genuine, deep, authentic human connection, the ability to be known. And in being known, to discover that the knowing does not diminish you, but adds to the joy of your life in ways that no amount of external success can replicate or replace. Now, I want to address the long game because this is a conversation about genuine transformation, and genuine transformation does not happen quickly. It happens the way all real growth happens, slowly, incrementally, through the sustained application of the right inputs over a sufficient period of time. The self-image was not built in a week or a month or a year. It was built across the whole of your lived experience through thousands of moments and messages and choices. And rebuilding it is a similar process. Not dramatic, not instantaneous, not the kind of thing that happens at a seminar and is complete by the time you drive home. It is steady, cumulative, and magnificently compounding over time. This is why the daily habits matter so enormously. Not the dramatic gestures. The dramatic gestures are memorable and occasionally important, but they are not where the real change lives. The real change lives in the daily, seemingly unremarkable choices. What you read in the morning before your mind has been claimed by the noise of the world. How you begin your day, whether you begin it with intention or with distraction. Whether you keep your private commitments to yourself. Whether you invest even a modest portion of each day in your own development. Whether you speak to yourself with the respect and the encouragement and the firm belief of a genuine mentor, or whether you speak to yourself with the casual contempt of someone who has given up on the project of becoming. These choices made consistently accumulate, they compound, they write themselves into the self-image one line at a time, one day at a time, one decision at a time, and over months and over years they write something extraordinary. A portrait of someone who has done the work, who has honored the process, who has had the discipline to pursue growth not when inspiration was high and the wind was at their back, but on the ordinary days, the unremarkable days, the days when nothing external was pushing them forward, and the only fuel was their own private commitment to the person they had decided to become. And one final thought before we come to the close of this conversation: be patient with the process, because I have seen too many people begin the work of self-image transformation with great energy and commitment, and then, when the change does not come as quickly or as dramatically as they had hoped, conclude that it is not working, and they abandon the effort. They return to the familiar limiting picture, not because the work was wrong or because they were incapable, but because they did not understand that the most important changes happen below the surface, long before they become visible above it. Think of a tree. For much of its growth, especially in the early years, most of what is happening is underground. The root system is extending. The foundational structure is being built. And to anyone observing from the surface, nothing appears to be happening. The tree does not look dramatically different from week to week, but something real is happening, something essential, something that will make everything visible, that comes later, both possible and sustainable. And if you pulled the tree out of the ground at that stage, impatient with the apparent lack of progress, you would destroy precisely what was being built. Be patient with your own root system. Trust that the consistent investments you are making, the daily choices, the kept promises, the courageous actions, the expanding associations, the ongoing study and reflection and service, are doing real work even when the results are not yet dramatically visible on the surface. The roots are going deeper. The foundation is becoming more solid. The self-image is being rebuilt at levels below the surface where all transformation always begins. And one day, not as far from today as you might fear, you will notice that you respond to something differently than you would have before. You will notice that you reached for something you would previously have talked yourself out of. You will notice that the voice in your head is kinder, more confident, more accurate than it used to be, and you will understand that the work was working all along. The world does not generally give you more than you believe you deserve. Opportunities present themselves to many people but are recognized and seized only by those who believe, at some level, that they are the kind of person for whom such opportunities are appropriate. Relationships reach a certain depth and no further in the presence of a self-image that has decided it is not worthy of genuine intimacy.